creepers still reproduce like honey creepers. They still are honey creepers. This one didn't turn into a gull or a crow or anything like that. They adapted in part, pieces, adapted in pieces, microevolution. This is what Darwin saw, and he said, well, if you can have microevolution in this little period of time, then over the grand span of time, you can have macroevolution. You can have change in whole bodies, and that was the theory. Everybody bought into that because it makes sense. It's logical. If had I been there, I would have bought into that. Most of you would have. But the problem is, Darwin himself said, if you can't find the transitional species that my theory calls for, my theory has to be wrong. And the transitional species are simply not there. Not there. I think if Darwin were standing here today, even though he's a homeboy, he would be willing to stand up and say, yeah, I made a mistake. I did the best I could under the circumstances. It just didn't work out. But because, again, Darwinists are so locked into that battle with creationists, they can't acknowledge the truth that all of them know. I know this, you can see this, a child can see this. Next slide. What really happens in the course of life is this, and this is a squeezed down version of the course of life, is that it's dominated by catastrophic events, mass extinctions, 5 of them, 5 major, what are called major, and several what are called minor. Now the majors take out anywhere from 50 to 90% of life when it happens, and it pretty much changes the environment of Earth. It's a catastrophe. And those that live, but after a period of time, and it generally is from 1,000 to a few million years, suddenly life begins to proliferate again. And it's generally a different kind of life than was here before, adapted to the new environment, whatever it is. Now, if indeed Darwinism worked, gradualism, naturalism, whatever you want to call it, it would be clearest in these periods after the extinction events, when the fossil record, for all intents and purposes, is wiped clean. It should show up, and they can read those fossil records, and what it shows is very clearly that new things just appear. Just appear. So in the 70s, Stephen Jay Gould and Niles Eldredge came up with an acknowledgement of this gaping hole in the Darwinian theory, and said, they put a patch on it, and the patch was called punctuated equilibrium. Now, if you want to really, really tick off a hardcore Darwinist, start talking to him about punctuated equilibrium. Why? Because it's the truth. And the truth is that things just appear. So the punctuated equilibrium theory is that when Darwinism can go slow, it goes slow, but somehow, after these extinction events, the animals that are left, the creatures that are left, the plants that are left, somehow their genes know they have to hit the accelerator and start speciating wildly into the new niches. And it's been analogized as a kernel of popcorn. A kernel would pop into its piece of popcorn under natural circumstances, and that would be its next step up the ladder of evolution. But somehow after these events, according to punctuated equilibrium, each remaining seed of popcorn, each remaining form of life, knows that it's time to pop itself into a whole big bucket of popcorn, which is absurd. It does not happen. Punctuated equilibrium is the story of what happens, and it's not gradualism, and it's not Darwinism. Things just appear here. And they appear all the way back to the prokaryotes, to the eukaryotes, to the Ediacaran fauna, to the Cambrian explosion. Everything appears. It's as if it's brought here. And that's what I contend, that it is brought here. That the planet is being terraformed, basically. And things come when it's time for them to come. Somebody's watching over the process. Okay, now let's start with that as background. Let's start talking about this guy right here. Let's start talking about humans and how humans came to be here. Next slide. Okay, this sums it up about as well as it can be done. The Darwinian paradigm. Everything else is eat, survive, reproduce, eat, survive, reproduce, and only us have the ability to stand there and say, what's it all about? How could we be so incredibly different from everything else? How could that happen? Well, let's start with this guy right here and take off the tail. the cartoonist probably feels like you do that monkeys preceded apes. You feel that way, do you not? The reality of it is that's not true. Apes, it isn't that there was no monkey-like creatures, but apes dominated in the era called the Miocene, which is around, just call it 20 million years ago. It's much longer than that, but just think 20 million years to simplify it. Around 20 million years ago, you have a period, take the tail off, of 24 ape species with maybe as many as 50 different types. Apes all over the place, and all sizes, ranging from the literally giant Gigantopithecus whose head would brush that right there, down to man size, plenty man size, down to small ones like gibbons and orangutans of today. We're talking tailless creatures, apes. Monkeys, very seldom found, not many monkeys out there. Apes dominate through the Miocene. And interestingly enough, a lot of Miocene apes, just as you see this guy right here, they have arms that are basically as long as their legs, and they have grasping hands. Now, he did that just inadvertently, but it turns out to be just about right. Now, what does that mean? It means those Miocene apes are not quadrupeds. They're not incipient quadrupeds. To be a quadruped, your arms have to be longer than your legs for you to move comfortably. All quadrupeds have that, longer arms than legs. So if you've got arms that are about the same size as your legs, you're not making it on all fours very well. You need to be up on 2 feet to be able to move comfortably. But you will not get any anthropologists that will acknowledge that. They insist that all of the ones with the longer arms were not only not bipeds, but none of them survived. All of them went extinct. The only survivors just happen to be the 4 quadrupeds that we accept today: gorillas, chimps, gibbons, and orangutans. That there was no possibility of upright walking all the way back into the Miocene, even though the evidence is pretty clear that it had everything it needed to be happening. Why is that? Because walking is considered to be a human exercise. And so walking is what we claim is our very own, what makes us special in the distant past, and walking has to be learned by somebody with the growing intelligence to do it. So you can't really tell the truth about the Miocene if you want to preserve that image. Okay, next slide. We know that there was a walking, upright, bipedal creature at 3.5 million years ago, because here's the tracks. At Laetoli, Tanzania, Mary Leakey's team found them in 78. Just a miracle. There was an ash fall 3.5 million years ago. 2 creatures went walking by, a large one and a small one. We assume it was a male and a female. And ash covered over it. Then it was found in 1978. Again, just a miracle. And here you go. And we've got good, clear images of the footprint of the creature walking 3.5 million years ago. So we assume that that creature that you saw must have started prior to that in order to be walking this efficiently upright at 3.5 million years ago. So the theory became, well, humans and apes must have split from a common ancestor sometime between 5 and 8 million years ago. 5 and 8 million years ago, for us to be walking upright well at 3.5. We had to be walking decently upright at 4 million years ago. So it's just pretty much randomly pulling it out of the hat. Now we have creatures that may be upright as far back as 6 million years ago, but there's debate and it's not proved yet. But at least 3.5 for sure, here we are. But it's not really a human track. Next slide. And that's understandable, because you're looking at 3.5 million years of, quote, evolution between these two. So you have quite a different look. This is a photogrammetric analysis, meaning it studies the pressure points in the footprints at Laetoli and in a human footprint. Now look at how we walk. We have a good hard slam on the heel, what's called a heel strike. We have our momentum shift over here. This is our ankle point, which is to the rear of our foot, back near our heel. And we swing our momentum around our arch, assuming we have normal feet, and then it goes over to here, it gathers in the ball under our big toe, and we thrust off of our big toe, and we use our other toes for balancers, and then we thrust off. Now this one, on the other hand, does it completely different. It's got an ankle that's centered up, middle of the foot. It's got a heel strike and a forefoot strike that are dead equal. It comes down flat on its feet, very smooth. And instead of toeing off the way we do, it toes off with the ball area of its foot. And in every way, this is actually a better stride. This is a better walk. Because what's happening with us is we're going from our heel strike, we're swinging our momentum around our arch and cutting it over like this. That's creating torque in our joints that we don't need. And that torque in our joints wears us out over time. And when we get old, our joints wear out and we get arthritis and you know all the things humans are subject to. So you're looking at a better, more efficient way to walk at 3.5 million years ago than us. That's pretty strange, isn't it? Now, what could be walking better than us at 3.5 million years ago? Next slide. Lucy. You all know Lucy. Afar Valley, Ethiopia, 1974, found by Donald Johanson. And here you go. She's upright. There's no doubt about it. 3.2 million years ago. And the assumption is that her kind made those tracks at Laetoli, and it's a fair assumption. I would agree with that. But what I want you to notice about Lucy is that she's about 3'6" to 3'8" tall. About 3 feet 6 to 3'8" tall. Now, notice how robust her bones are relative to humans. If that was a human being standing there that was the same size, 3'6" to 3'8", her arm bone would be the size of this, the forearm bone, rather than this. So Lucy, as all primates are as much stronger and has much more robust bones than we do, and a longer upper arm bone. It would be, the human one would be off about right here somewhere. Longer in the arms. Okay, next slide. Lucy's group is the Australopithecines. She's Afarensis, there's Africanus, there's Robustus, and Boise. What you're looking at is basically the pre-human record from 4 million years ago approximately to 2 million years ago approximately. Now, like I said, there are some others that are recent discoveries that could go back as far as 6 million years, but for right now, this is the starting lineup of the Australopithecines. 2 upright walking chimps, 2 upright walking gorillas. 2 upright walking chimps, 2 upright walking gorillas. Now, doesn't it make sense to assume that they might have walked out of the Miocene on those 2 feet? Since they're basically primates, they're chimps and gorillas. They're primates. Ah, but no, it couldn't be because they walk upright. So they have to be pre-humans, which is part of the brainwashing to get everybody to believe that somehow humans are coming out of this dark past that nobody quite seems to understand. Next slide. What you have at 2 million years ago to the present is a transformation here. You go from those chimps and gorillas to something that really does look more man-like. So it's called early Homo. Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo archaic, and Neanderthal skullcap. And then us, Cro-Magnon, right here, 120,000 years ago in the fossil record. So we've gone from 4 million years, suddenly some kind of transformation here at the 2 million year mark. And then you have this kind of microevolution in which you get changes in the configurations and some increase in the brains. But basically, they stay the same. They stay the same as they were when they were Australopithecines and got rearranged. They have thick bones, which all of the Australopithecines had, much thicker than ours. They have these thick, heavy brow ridges. They have big, round, night vision eyes. They have wide nasal passages. And they have mouths that stick off their face, both in the upper jaw, maxilla, and the lower jaw. And the lower jaws have no chins. The chins just drop off. With this, you have a completely different reconfiguration. You have a great thinning of the bone, a lightening of the bone. You have great reduction in the brow ridges. You have a forehead. I forgot to mention they don't have foreheads. They just slope back from the brows, but it's hard to see from a front-on view, but they have no forehead. So we have a forehead. We have greatly reduced brow ridges. We have eye sockets that are greatly reduced relative to these and poor night vision. We have little pinched up noses that stick off our face. We have mouths that are squashed in flat. And we have chins that stick out. Exactly the opposite. In every dimension you could ask for, we are completely different than them. And yet, we're told that's a transition just coming right on through.